Okay. Well, everybody that is with us, it appears that right now we're approaching 90 as we speak, and I'm sure more will join us. Yesterday was an interesting ride into politics where we had many different opinions. This binational state was a most interesting presentation by Iran in his conclusion. And we see today that the politics once again are dominating the Israeli scene. The conventional wisdom right now is there will be a new election sometime probably in March, and I guess here we go again for Israel. Today, it's a much easier subject in the sense that the whole issue of aiding the Israeli Arab economically is an issue that really found favor with almost the entire government of Israel. Of course, we know in the passing of 922, tremendous resources, billions and billions of shekels poured into the Israeli Arab society. And our own task force, even though we ourselves don't involve ourselves in raising money or giving money, but a number of our members, especially on the foundation side, played a real role in helping reinforce 922. So today we'll hear about economic developments. We'll hear how the pandemic has affected the Israeli Arab society uniquely. And with that, I turn it over once again to Liron.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the second part of our task force annual meeting. Normally an event that takes place in person where we have the opportunity to share our work, bring insights, but also hear from each other about what these issues mean for American Jewish communities, organizations, and leadership. We'll hopefully have a little bit of time for some alternative to that kind of processing at the end, but I really want to get to today's program. As Brian said, if yesterday we looked at the complexities of political discourse, which is ever changing and so in some ways mercurial, today we're looking at efforts to integrate Arab citizens into Israel's employment job market. This is an issue that has gained momentum over the last 20 years very, very seriously. And over the last 10 years especially has seen enormous gains, both for the sake of Israel's economic strength and for the shared spaces and cohesion that it helps to generate. The coronavirus crisis is the first major economic crisis that is challenging the momentum of these gains and the efforts behind them. Today, we're going to hear how this priority, as both as a national priority and as activities in the private sector, have been affected by the crisis. We begin on the national policy level with Professor Tzvi Eckstein, who is the Dean of the Tiomkin School of Economics at IDC, the head of the Aaron Institute for Economic Policy, and the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of Israel. He'll share how national employment policy has taken form over the last decade and the place of Arab employment within it. He will then introduce Marian Tehako, head of the Economic Policy Program for Arab Society in Israel at the Aaron Institute, who will share the data about the impact on Arab employment over this crisis and the recommendations of the Aaron Institute to mitigate the damage and inform the next national employment policy to continue removing barriers to Arab employment. Together, they will speak for approximately 25 or 30 minutes, after which we'll have time for Q&A. And again, I encourage you to share questions over chat as we go. Professor Eckstein, please.
Okay, thank you, Liron and Brian, for having me. Thank you, everybody, being here today. I will do want to put on my slides. It would make a bit easier for you to follow my main points as I go ahead. I just want to add a little bit about my background. I did grow up in Israel in a kibbutz. I went to study at Tel Aviv University. I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota. My first job was at Yale, then I moved back to Tel Aviv. And I was back and forth between the Israel and an academic until 2006, where Professor Fisher, you probably know him, after a year, he was a governor of the Bank of Israel. He asked me to join to be a deputy. And the one thing that I was very different than many deputies, that I was very much involved in employment policy, because almost like Janet Yellen, I'm younger than her a bit, but I am also a labor economist. And I was very much involved in shaping up national employment policy, which had a huge impact on the Arab society. And I will give you what was my involvement and how that's related to my being now the head of the Aaron Institute. In 2011, my term expired, and after 5 years, and I went back to academia to IDC Herzliya, where I became the dean of the Tiomkin School, and then I established the Aaron Institute, which is sort of a think tank, very much like Brookings. But when I was deputy governor, and as the government of the Benjamin Netanyahu was formed in 2009, I convinced the government to establish the committee to basically draw the 10 years program for employment. And in 2010, and the committee was involved of government professionals representing the different departments, etc., and other academic and so forth. And we basically recommended the government, and the government adopted, to get employment targets. What are employment targets? Employment targets is to enhance employment in the less skilled, and in particular, the Arab men and women, and also ultra-Orthodox, but also other, what we call Jewish men and women, which are not ultra-Orthodox, where employment rates were very low at that time. Employment rates is the number of people work relative to the population. And just before COVID, basically at the beginning of 2020, the employment rates overall in the country reached 78%. This is not a number everyone knows, but it's basically above US, above OECD, in fact, very close to the top 10 in advanced OECD countries. And the program that we set was very successful. And what was the program? When we set up in 2009, we set up and we put the vision that we want to enhance employment in Israel to be at the top 15. At that time, we were below the average. And mainly the non-employment, not only unemployment. Unemployment was around 7% at that time, but non-employment was very high among the low skills and among Arab and ultra-Orthodox in particular, both men and women and the families. And that was an important part for the high poverty rates in Israel. And what happened is that it was adopted. And in fact, it was adopted to put the Arab to reach 78% men, and women 41%, where in 2008 numbers, when we started, it was only 23%. And then we said how to do it, and we said one-stop centers. And I don't know if you know about the Rayan centers that were set by the government and philanthropic contributions. By the joint was involved there. They put established one-stop centers, 20 one-stop centers before 922, all over most of the small towns and villages in Israel of Arab communities. And they had programs of diagnosis and some soft skills and move them into work. And what happened, the main reason we said that our program will contribute 1% additional growth in Israel, and it did. And it substantially increased GDP, but I think even more important, from the research we did at the Aaron Institute, we showed that what happened is second spouse went to work, income of household went up, poverty rate actually started going down since 2016 due to the increased employment. And that all worked until the COVID-19 crisis. What were the main program aspects? First, organizational. Israel doesn't have even today a labor department. At least we put an employment commissioner that will overlook the programs. Then the one-stop centers that I mentioned about, also for the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox, that help to bring people out of the labor force into employment, expand daycare, especially for communities which were very low income, that the government will take it, enlarge negative income tax that was later was actually enhanced, and targets also proven to be, it's like in business, you have a target, then every one-stop center had a target related to the national target, and that was very useful way of making government action to work. And the other recommendation adopted, and I want to emphasize, the success of that was an engine into the 922. I don't know if you know Ayman Saif, which was the head of the authority of the Arab community in Israel, and he was involved in the implementation of the employment program, and that was helping him and the government to convince that actually investing in the low income societies makes Israel going up. We already saw that we are reaching the target in 2017. In 2017, this was already 6 years after I was deputy governor. It was already 6 years that I am dean, but we established the Aaron Institute in 2014. And the Aaron Institute, as I said, is a think tank based on donations, basically by the Dovrat family, but also others. And I went to the Minister of Labor and Welfare, Mr. Chaim Katz. I met him, I knew him before when I was deputy governor. We had a lot of disagreement on employment policy when he was a Knesset member. And I told him that we need now another 10 years program. And because we need to enhance employment, but also more important, we have to enhance human capital. And he appointed me to be the head of the committee. And the committee was it was very interesting that the enthusiasm for the committee rose on the name of the previous committee, that we did a change, and it was not just talking and waste of time. And we get NGOs, we get the industrialists, we get the students in, we get some people from academia. I particular very proud that I got Mrs. Dita Bronitsky. I don't know what she is, the CEO for Mat Industries, and she was very much in favor of vocational training. And she was the head of the subcommittee in our committee on vocational training. And we put a vision, enhance employment and human capital, but focus on what we call in Israel the lower 50, 60%, those who don't go to academia, those who hardly finish high school, for the whole country. But then the number of Arabs among them is much higher than the average. The number of ultra-Orthodox also. And we said the following: there was a consensus agreement, and to reach a consensus agreement within the government, within the Ministry of Finance people, and also the people at the Labor Department, to increase employment target from 70, actually the target at that time was below 78, it was 76.5, to 80%, but then built it up from below. For Arab men, to reach 83%, which we had a 78%, we didn't reach it actually in 2018-19 when we work on the program. But there was a huge argument how much we can reach women. And there was people who are saying that 53% is too low. But that was when the total employment rate was 38%. And I think the most success was that we reached a conclusion that we need to reduce the gap between the wage per hour among Arab and Arab men and Jewish men, and that requires special program. And what was the program? Basically, if you want to reduce the gap, you make the human capital and the skills of the Arab men to be closer. And we basically suggested the reform in vocational technological training. To be honest, you ask me what is the reform? In fact, we learn a lot on labor market. I'm a labor economist. We met a lot of Americans. I don't know if you know, there are actually people, Cecile Rose, who just become the future appointed head of the Council of Economic Advisors, her work in the 90s was a lot about community colleges in the US. And the 2-year program in the community college that are successful, like in Florida, were the form that we adopted. And quality training is the main mechanism to increase productivity and wages, especially for people who hardly finish high school or and have maybe a low-grade matriculation, cannot go to academic. And we suggested a full reform there, which was widely accepted by the Ministry of Finance. We also enhance employment programs and enhance soft skills. One of the most important aspects of the committee was the work that Marianne Tauko, that I would present shortly, did, and she showed how much Hebrew knowledge is important for especially Arabic women to be able to join the labor market and to get a reasonable wage, but even to go and reach an academic. English ability, digital literacy, and the government already accepted. By the way, the Hebrew knowledge, sort of an ulpan for Arabs who are going to the Rayan Center, is already implemented by the Joint and other people. Also, we discussing the potential of the AI revolution and the expected loss of manual job, and the vocational training for existing workers, but in particular the unemployed and the less skilled, is extremely important. And the recommendations, actually we finished, our work took a while. We started in the summer of 2017. We completed most of the work in the middle of 2018. Then the Commissioner of Labor replaced. Then it took a while. By the end of 2019, we had a recommendation. Then we had 3 elections. And then in May, we had a labor minister, and he accepted the rules. And actually, today, the Ministry of Finance put the recommendation drafted in the budget law, which I was hoping it would be accepted in a month or 2. But now the political mess is going to delay it. And I think it's a real problem, because the report becomes common. You know, I talked to the current minister, Katz. I talked to the prime minister. I met the prime minister in July about employment. The report became the common wisdom for policy among everybody. And that's, I think, is the key achievement that we reach. And even in the crisis today, the vocational training is even more needed. As you know, in the US, one of the Biden program is to increase community college budget and implement policies now. You know, the COVID-19 crisis is an employment crisis. US is an amazing in terms of number of jobs created. But in Israel, unemployment is probably 15%. Employment rates are way back. You will see in a minute from Dr. Marianne Tauko about it. The weakest group lost employment. It's very high risk of losing gains of the last 10 years. And the committee recommendations are the right answer to the current crisis. And I think what we recommend the government is to focus the budget, to focus policies on reaching back the rates of high employment that we had, especially in the weakest groups, in 2 years. I hope they can do it. It's very hard. It's easy to move to 70%, but not to 78%. And the focus should be on coherent programs that does what employment policies do. They take an individual, you do the diagnosis, what is ability, what is gain, what is a comparative advantage in the labor market. Then you see if he needs training. Then you see what is the employers really, what is the demand, and do placement. And actually in Israel, the implementation of that is fairly weak and has to be enhanced. And I think the acceptance and the seeing how the success has been by putting people back to work, it become a common wisdom in Israel across parties, right to left, of the importance of helping the Arab population, the weakest part of we put it in a general policy, but certainly the weak people, those in the Arab community, which a very hard time to get into the labor market for many, many reasons, including not only skills and other transportation, etc., has to be taken care by the government because the government is a key player in making them to work. I stop here, and I would like to introduce Marianne Tauco, Dr. Marianne Tauco. Marianne, she is from the Cherkess minority in Israel. She lives in the Kama village, which is next to Afula in the north. She grew up there. She is fluent in Cherkess. She's fluent in Arabic. She is fluent in English and certainly in Hebrew. And she did her PhD at the Haifa University. Actually, her topic was employment of Arab females. And she is heading the program in the Aaron Institute for the enhancement policy for enhancement of the Arab community in Israel. And Marianne, this is your stage now, and I hope you feel better. Marianne is a little bit has some sickness, so very good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tzvi.
Okay, so hello everyone. I would like to thank Liron for inviting us to this important conference. And sorry about my voice. I have a cold, but I will do my best to be short and clear. Okay, so in my part, I will introduce the employment crisis in Arab society in numbers, and I will present the Aaron Institute policy recommendations to achieve the 2020 and 2030 committee's goals. As Zvika mentioned, the COVID-19 is an employment crisis, substantial for all, but severe for young and less skilled, as we will see later on. Here you see the employment rates in the main working age for all population in Israel since 2000 till July 2020. Pre-crisis is January. Crisis peak was in April, and after first wave is July 2020. We choose to present till July so we can see what happens when we return to a state of life alongside the corona, when the economy begins to recover from the closure. As you can see here, in terms of aggregate employment in Israel, the corona brought us 10 years back. Focusing on men, we see Arab men went down to employment rates having been observed in the last 20 years in Israel. And the question is, what is the reason? So if you compare the drop in Jewish and Arab men's employment over Corona, you can see the drop is roughly the same, as you can see here, from 87% to 80% for Jewish men, and from 70% to 63% for Arab men. But if you look more closely, so you can see that the decline in the employment rates of Arab men began before the corona, starting in 2018 and significantly in late, as you can see here, in late 2019 and early 2020 before the corona crisis. And sorry, an initial examination of the composition showed that the decline before the corona was mainly among young with no education and no profession, and 80% of them were in manufacturing. This data can indicate to the impact of the automation process that occurs mainly in the manufacturing industry that causes the emission of low-skilled workers. Now, looking at females, we see something similar. Though Arab women's employment rates were very low, they have been gradually rising towards the government target for 2020 of 41%. Also here, as among Arab men, the decline began before the crisis, starting in 2019, but it was more moderate than among men. The corona crisis strengthened our understanding that the Arab workforce needs to change. Income and employment gaps in the past had to do with high numbers of Arabs in low-skilled jobs, difficulties for young people to enter the workforce, and early drop-off from employment in the construction and manufacturing industries. Over Corona, these are the people that lost their jobs. 78% of Corona's unemployed are unskilled. I'm talking here, of course, about the Arab unemployed. 76% are younger than 45, and among men, 44% are professional in construction and manufacturing. Meantime, though there are fewer in number, high-skilled workers who managed to break into advanced professions were less affected from the corona. Given the accelerated crisis in the labor market, the unskilled young Arabs are expected to remain out of employment, even in the long run, which means that the Arab society in Israel is experiencing more poverty, welfare, gray market, and violence. On the social level, it means fewer opportunities to close social and economic gaps between Jews and Arabs. And on the Israeli economic level, this means impairment of GDP and slowdown in growth. Employment of Arab citizens had high priority in the employment committees, as Tzvika said. And given the severe impact of the crisis on the Arab employment, the priority only intensified. The question is, what can be done to bring the numbers back up? We are urging for an aggressive national policy, employment policy. First, to return to the goals set by the 2020 Employment Committee as fast as possible. And second, to build on the momentum of the last 10 years by implementing the recommendations of the 2030 Employment Committee. For 2020 goals, the main area was to invest in Arab women's employment, and these targets were nearly reached by 2017. As Tzvi said, for 2030 goals, even before Corona, we saw the need to focus also on Arab men, both their rate of employment and quality. Our research led us to identify the following areas as the key points for intervention, where the budget will have the immediate and important impact to achieve the employment targets. First, we recommend an overall approach that will improve human capital development, meaning investing in correctly matching and developing skills of the existing and new unemployed with the needs of the new job market. This means, as Tzvika mentioned before, this means focusing on three components that complement each other. First, skills occupational diagnosis, to assess and identify skills and potential. The second stage is vocational training, to offer appropriate training matching skills. Here we need to complete missing skills such as Hebrew and digital literacy, and in addition, to adapt the skills to the requirements of the new job market. And the last link here is the placement that takes place in coordination with employers so that the skills offered meet the needs of the new job market. Of course, there are centers that do each of these at some level, not enough. And there is very little connection between them to create an effective circle. This is true for all levels of skills and qualifications. And as I said before, the program should be offered to all unemployed and new entrants. Along with this approach, there are three key barriers that limit the career paths of Arab citizens. First, the Hebrew barrier. The level of spoken and professional Hebrew for most Arab high school graduates is far below the level needed for meaningful employment or higher education. So our recommendations in this issue include Hebrew studies for adults and improve Hebrew educational for students in schools, conversation for all, and reading and writing for higher education. Second, the data here is just unbelievable. 85% of employed Arabs lacking basic digital skills. I'm talking here about the ability to send an email or to connect to Zoom. And also 30% of the Arab population is not connected to the internet. So we are talking here about a lack of both infrastructure and digital capabilities. So given the importance of accessibility to distance learning and remote working in the current era, we recommend digital literacy courses for the Arab population and improving internet quality and accessibility in Arab towns. And last, the third barrier, we are talking here about the studying abroad. Over 30% of Arab college students in Israel study abroad. I'm talking here about more than 15,000 students each year. And 80% of them study the paramedical professions. They struggle to find work when they return and need to readapt to Israeli medical instructions. If they studied at home, the skill development and integration into the workforce would be a lot smoother. This is an example of the mismatch between the career paths and horizons of many of the skilled Arab citizens and the lack of readiness among Israeli institutions to meet them. In this case, paramedical professions are an example of how interventions in one field can narrow employment gap for thousands of young skilled Arabs. We recommend to expand paramedical studies within Israeli institutions, and this recommendation were adopted by the Department of Chief Economist in Ministry of Finance. And of course, there are additional policy topics on our agenda for future research. You have here the issue of the reduction in men's employment is a major issue that concerns even our prime minister. So we have to study and recommend policies about this issue. Second, sorry, is building a program to treat the group of young people who are not in education, employment, or training. It's a huge problem in the Arab community in Israel. Developing of urban centers in Arab localities to encourage employment and economic development. And the biggest problem in the Arab community in Israel today is the rising of violence and crime in Arab society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Tzvi and Marianne. Marianne, I hope you're feeling okay, taking water. We have a few minutes for Q&A. There's been a lot of chat while you've been speaking. There's three main areas of questions. One is about mobility and how relevant are these recommendations for, we see the hardest hit being on unskilled workers, but do the 2030 goals look at also employment mobility and not just getting the least skilled into the workforce, but allowing Arab citizens to move up? Another question is about how the recommendations so far relate to the supply side, strengthening the capacity of Arab citizens to enter the job market. But what are the recommendations on the demand side? What about requirements for fair representation in the private sector, or offering incentives to companies or public to employ Arabs? And what about in government tenders? Basically, looking at the entire pipeline for employment. Let's start with these two and see if we have time. Marianne, are you okay? Are you able to answer?
I would take...
I will let Zvika answer. My voice is terrible.
I would say the following. Certainly, there are a lot of aspects of that the government doesn't provide to the Arab society, affecting their ability of mobility. The education system, the infrastructure, the physical mobilities, for example, public transportation, etc., etc. There are a lot of missing aspects. The committee could not cover everything because the committee make a plan to the Ministry of Labor. Ministry of Labor is responsible on the labor supply side and the skills there. Certainly, the issues of demand are extremely important. But to deal with the issues of the demand side was not in the terms of this ministry, and that was I want to emphasize. Certainly, there are targets of the government to employ Arabs into the public sector. There are no targets in the private sector, but the fact that the government put one-stop centers. The one-stop center's main goal is to match employees and the business sector and the public sector to the Arab community. So the one-stop centers have some facilities to also bring the demand side, but it's absolutely right. The committees themselves focus on the supply side, and I want to emphasize, we know for years that the supply side is the most determined on low skills. For example, Israel absorbed 1 million people from the former Soviet Union, and most of the incentives were on the supply side, on training, on Hebrew, and on readjusting human capital to the Israeli market. And also in the US, most of the change in employment among welfare people was when they have targeted employment policies on welfare to work. That was the big revolution by Blair in the 90s, by Clinton in the 90s. So I want to emphasize, it's true that the demand side is important, but the key are the skills of the people. And for example, when you see among the Arabs who provide themselves with skills to be doctors or to work in the medical, then the medical community bring them in and they become 30% of doctors in the Israeli health system. So I'm not saying that the demand side is not important, but I think given the lack of facilities in the whole education system, and especially in vocational training, really hit back the opportunities of the Arab communities, and that's what we did.
I want to bring this, connect this question back to the question of mobility, because we do have the next section of this meeting is about the private sector and about enhancing the pipeline. The question was, again, about unskilled versus skilled labor. We know that the private sector is really important in enlarging the pipeline, creating mobility, which then brings more Arab citizens into the job market. Can you connect the dots a little bit about how these recommendations speak to also more qualified people who are coming in with qualifications but still face barriers entering the market?
It is true. Our committee did not specify on the high skill. I mean, in Israel, I want to emphasize, in Israel, the academic system is, in this particular committee, the academic system is well developed. However, we did another study in the Aaron Institute, and this study about the fact that a lot of Arabs who are going to academic studies don't study within the Israeli institutions. And we did a study that tried to analyze why. And that's a separate study for the Committee of 2030. I want to emphasize the Committee 2030 and 2020 was focused on the Ministry of Labor. And the Ministry of Labor in Israel has the authority over the issues of employment policies and vocational training, which are focused on those who don't go to academy. There are programs into enhancing academic attainment among Arabs. Those programs were partially successful. We did a study of why Arabs who go to academic, you know, there are about 8,000 Israeli Arabs who are studying in the West Bank. And there are a lot of them study in Jordan and also in Europe. And the main reason are two. One is that there are not enough academic institutions who provide training in health-related occupations. Dentists, even doctors, it's very hard to get accepted. And the second one is their knowledge of Hebrew. What happens even is that the extremely successful students who finish in the top matriculation grades, which in that grade they should be accepted into medicine in Israel, are not accepted because their Hebrew is not fluent. And therefore, as Marianne said, we made two recommendations, and the government, or at least the professional part of the government, seems to accept it, is to change completely the Hebrew teaching, both into the high school and as well as they go to the labor market, and also to the academic labor market. And I want to emphasize that that aspect is really a problem of you grew up in a village or towns which are secluded by Arabs. It's if you don't give them access to the main skills needed in the Israeli labor market, it's very hard for the demand side to be adopted and to bring them into either academic institutions or into jobs. And that's our main research.
Thank you very much. We also thank you for answering these. We're really on time to move on to the next session. So I just want to say that for everyone who wanted to hear also Marianne again, she's been responding on chat. Thank you. And we're giving her voice a rest because she's really not feeling well. But I really thank both of you, Professor Zvi Eckstein, Marianne Tahako, for your research, for your work, and for sharing the recommendations and your perspective with us. There's lots of questions on chat, which is just showing how much interest there is in this issue. And we will, I'm sure we'll continue. This will be a subject we'll continue both in the rest of this session and throughout the year. So thank you both for your time with us. The next session, we're going to jump right in, is on the private sector. National policy is doesn't just, as to be explained, national policy doesn't just happen, doesn't just mean that there's activity on the government level. It means there's coordination and cohesion throughout the country. It gives a goal that the private sector then works towards, the civil society works towards, and we have with us for the second part, Nawa Jashan Bachon, CEO of Co-Impact, who an organization that works to engage the private sector. I'm sorry, my screen is acting a little funny. Co-Impact is an NGO that works to engage the private sector in enhancing diversity and inclusion, specifically towards Arab employment. She will share a little bit about the journey that Co-Impact has taken with major employers in Israel to make diversity and inclusion key values, and in their employment and also within their organizations. And we'll introduce the CEO of OSEM, Avi Ben Asayag, who will speak about the journey that his company has made as a Co-Impact company, and Rima Shamshon, the Director of Organizational Development and HR at HP Indigo, who will share both experience of candidates, Arab candidates, highly qualified Arab candidates in the Israeli market. So with no further ado, Nawa Jashan Bachon, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Liron, and thank you for the task force for having us and inviting us today to take part in this important conference. So I will be talking in the next few minutes about co-impact work, and I think maybe some of the questions will be addressed through my speech. Co-impact actually was established in 2014 in order to address the employment gap between the Jewish and Arabs in Israel. The research that was done with Shaldor back in 2014 showed us that in order to make a change in the business sector, we need to engage the biggest companies and lead them to a deep changes concerning the Arab employment, not only in numbers, but also in qualitative purposes and targets. The research show us very sad numbers of only 5% of the employed people in the private sector are from the Arab society, while only 0.3% are in the managerial positions. And of course, we are not talking about senior managerial positions. So in order to promote the full and appropriate inclusion of Arab society, we work with the biggest companies. We work top down and bottom up. We address the companies from the CEOs. We need the CEOs to be on board so that they can lead the change. And from this change, we can change the inside of the companies, not only by them recruiting more numbers, but also for them having a true inclusive culture and organization for all the Arab candidates and employees. So for us to do that, we have a team of key account manager and organizational consultant that works closely with the companies, and Avi from OSEM and Rima will surely talk about that later on. The work that we do starts with evaluation of the company, and then we bring 3 years of program plan to with the goals that is really achieved by the companies in order to lead the change. This is concerning the work. Also, today, after 5 years in the field, we are proud to say that we are in 40 companies from all the industries. OSEM, Nuva, Coca-Cola, Amdocs, Deloitte are some of the names. We have over 4,000 recruitments of the Arab society in these companies, and around 700 of them academic recruitment that we are proud of, not only non-skilled people, also skilled academic with degrees in headquarters and the managerial positions. And that is due to the targets that the companies put and the efforts they put in the program. Also, what we have seen that in order to achieve that, and I saw that people have been asking about the discrimination that the Arab society has seen from the private sector and non-private sector over the years when they were trying to find jobs. And as you know, it's not only around employment issue. There are a lot of discrimination in many issues that we face. And we know also from our research that 50% of the Arab society even did not apply to the big companies because they knew that there is no chance for them to be accepted. So we also target the Arab society. We want to build the trust and deliver the message that something is happening in the private sector, and the Arab the companies is really leading the change, and they are opening their doors for really quality job that has a qualification for their studies. And this has been done through outreach to the Arab society. And where we put the business sector in the front, we want that the companies deliver this message to the Arab society. And this has been successful, including employer branding strategy that we are leading with them. Of course, we base our work on a collective impact model. This means that we, by ourselves, can't lead the change in the employment field. We need all stakeholders to be part of it. So we have the NGO forum, we have the President House, we have a business council, we have a young forum that is really active. All together help us to lead the change in the field. Also concerning the business companies, but also the Arab society. And the idea of the collective impact model is that not only to have the stakeholders or creating the forums, also how to connect them. So we have a mentoring program where senior business people mentor Arab young people. We have the President House who has gave his sponsorship over the companies and the CEO. So also connecting between all the stakeholders is really important. I want to say a little bit about what is happening in the Corona this year, something that nobody expected. And really the Arab society felt that and still feeling that they will be the first to be out of work and the last to be back in. So we are really putting effort with the companies. We regret that we have only 40 companies for now, but this is the goal that we put of 10 companies each year. But still, it's 40 big companies that when the CEO of OSEM or CEO of Nuva talk about the importance of involving more Arab employees or how they are proud of having high numbers of Arab employees, this deliver a message of hope. And we're really trying to make more effort to the Arab community, not to be passive and not to lose hope, because they won't be the last one to be back to work. And we had the research with Accord in July, and there was some good news in that, because people that the Arab society who understand the challenge that is happening now in the market, they are more willing to travel far to work. So this is good news, because as you know, the Arab society is not many of them in the center where the big companies is located. And on the other hand, we hear from the companies that they are more open and willing for distant working. And we even hear them today that they are not talking only for the Corona period, but also how this is going to continue after the Corona. And this is a good news for the Arab society, because it's really can make it easier for them to be part of these big companies. Last remark that I have regarding shared workplaces, we believe, and me especially believe, that when we bring people together to work together in companies, big companies that have thousands of employees, and Arab and Jews meet each other, and when the Jewish candidate apply to a company and an HR Arabic woman or man interview them, this really create an encounter that is different, that's not that you don't have every day. And we believe that the change that we are leading in the companies inside can affect the outside, what is happening in Israel. And as you know, a lot is happening in this day. So just to summarize, we really aim to an impact. We want to change the private sector. We do work with companies. We don't try to say that we have changed it, but we are leading change in 40 companies, and we aim 100 companies in 10 years. And for employment that is really appropriate for Arab society. And we want to create the hope for the Arab society, as some of you has asked, how is the attitude toward the students and graduates that finish their academic degrees. So this is the start. And when big companies like OSEM and Nuva lead the change, they really create a model for other companies that are small or medium to take an effort of diversity and inclusion. Thank you. So I will introduce now Avi. And Avi is the CEO of one of our pilot companies, OSEM Nestle. Avi Ben Asayag, a wonderful example of a leader and the CEO and a company that truly takes pride in the diversity and inclusion of Arab society in their company, and with good reason, of course. I will let him to tell you about how he has led OSEM in their diversity and inclusion journey and the effects it had for the company. Please, Mr. Avi.
Yeah, thank you, Nawa. Thank you, and don't exaggerate with too many compliments. So I'm Avi Ben Asayag, and I'm heading OSEM Nestle here in Israel. Thank you for this invitation to participate in this important conference and this particular session, and let you know a little bit about the journey that we at OSEM Nestle actually conducted in order to fulfill the value of diversity and inclusion in our company, and with more specific for Israeli Arab employment within our organization. Before I'll touch the main subject, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, that it will give you some light about how we perceive actually this diversity and inclusion within our company. So in very short, I was born in the peripheral area of the country to immigrants that came in the late 50s to Israel, okay? In order to gain some education, I have to leave to a boarding school, to a yacht village, and then afterwards as an officer in the Israeli army, university, and so on and so forth. In every station during my career, I did ask myself, can I do that? I was asked by many people, when I join new societies, new companies, can you really do that? Today, at 55, I can say proudly, yes, I can do, and not only me, many others can do. Everybody that wishes, everybody that will, everybody that is getting the opportunity to do that, yes, he can get to the top of this society if we let them the opportunity to get there. As a citizen of Israel and as a CEO of the third largest food and beverage company here, I'm following the employment in this country and the situation and the inequality. And this situation is not great, to say the least, I must say. And the Corona crisis actually emphasize the situation, those gaps within the Israeli society. The gaps, the socioeconomical gaps are extremely high. In particular, when we look at the societies in the peripheral side of the country, the Arab society, and of course the ultra-Orthodox. And we see it all over. I see the donation that we had to give this year. Actually, we doubled the amount of money and food donation that we gave to different food banks here in Israel. In some of them you may be familiar. We follow actually the statistics in Israel, and while the general society retail sales grew up by more than 10% in the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox, actually sometimes it declined. Actually, we do see this crisis hitting those society very, very badly. I do perceive this diversity and inclusion as a national importance, something that our top leaders should take into consideration to give a right chance to the young generation, actually coming from weakened society, actually to get into a better life road towards self-fulfillment and a better welfare. I do believe that this value, if we adopt it rightly, will improve the integration within the Israeli society and will turn us as a much, much, much better people, much better organization, much better society. Awesome Nestle, in a nutshell, was actually incorporated in 1942 by 7 immigrants coming from Eastern Europe. And gradually, along the last 25 years, it was acquired by the Nestle Corporation, which you may be familiar with as well. Awesome Nestle is the third largest food and beverage company in Israel, employing more than 4,000 employees, most of them coming from the peripheral side of the country. We have more than 8 factories, and we're selling more than $1 billion of different food and beverage stuff here in Israel. Most of it produced here locally within our factories. Our employees are the most valuable assets we have. They are well connected to the company, and they perceived Awesome Nestle as their home, real home. Promoting actually the diversity and inclusion value within our company was a journey. First of all, diversity and inclusion is part of our vision. Our vision consists certain values elements, and this is part of our vision. Furthermore, it's not only part of our vision, it's part of our what we call operating master plan. In our operating master plan, we have 4 major areas which deals with growth, improving efficiencies, and diversity and inclusion is one of the most important pillars within the people quadrant, the people targets. Okay, so inclusive and diversity is something that must turn to be something which is part of the organization DNA in order to change actually the mindset of the people towards being actually more diversified and more inclusive. We at Nestle, at OSE, we believe that by being diversified and inclusive, we will be a much better and a much more successful organization. And actually, we prove it every day. We prove it really every day. Diversity and inclusion includes various subjects, gender balance. We here at Awesome Nestle, 43% of our employees starting at my level are basically females, okay? It goes with disabilities, youth employment, and of course, ethnic and different people coming from different religions and different parts of the society. Focusing more on the Arab employment within our company, it's, as I said, it's an example to fulfill how we fulfill the diversity and inclusion within our organization. You know, looking at the past history, and I have vast experience in the Israeli industry. I worked in the high-tech industry, in other food and beverage, and now I'm running Awesome Nestle here for a few years. You know, we always were saying, you know, wow, we know we have Arabs, we have Jews, we have Christians, we have everybody here, you know, so we are this diversified already. But in 2015, where we started this journey and put a mirror in front of our faces and looked into the real numbers and data, we found out that just 7% of our employees are coming from the Arab society, while the Arab society consists for 25% of the Israeli population. You know, it's 2 million out of 9. So what the heck, okay? So we're not that good, okay? Then we realized that this is actually, we have to change something fundamental in our employment policy, in our employment strategy, in our organization. After 5 years, I'll give you already the data. After 5 years, I can tell you proudly that we already have 20%, that 20% of our employees are coming from the Arab society. And by the way, they're working all along the company. There we have economists, we have HR people, we have marketing people, we have factory managers, we have everybody, and we have also logistics and sales and factory and regular employees. We have them along all the organization. And very shortly, I will be proud to tell you that we have also an Arab guy that is part of my leadership team here in the organization. And this is going to happen, I can promise you, during my tenure as the CEO of this organization. How we did that? What's the process that we have gone through in order to get there? Firstly and mostly, get to know the Arab society. It appears, it's actually the ignorance level we are all actually sharing. Understanding the neighbors that are just here, okay, sitting with us, living with us, is unbelievable. So get to know the Arab society is something which is very essential. And we did a lot in this respect to get to know the people, to get to know this society much better. Then how to approach the candidates. You know, most of the candidates never believed that we really mean it. You know, we were actually advertising recruitment ads, but we were not getting actually replies. Okay, so how do you gain the trust of the Arab potential employees candidate? This is by itself, it's a mission, by itself, it's a challenge that you must resolve. Okay, so we approach NGOs, and Co-Impact is definitely one of the major NGOs that actually assisted us to get to this society. Today, we talk, you know, we interview the people in Arabic. Today, we actually publish recruitment ads in their papers, in their internet sites, okay? And I do believe using also Co-Impact people as agencies, I think that the trust that we really mean it actually increased substantially. And today, when we go to Taipei or to wherever it is, okay, and actually run a recruitment workshop or a students workshop and trying to attract Arab candidates to different roles within our organization, I do believe that they really trust that it's worth to come and participate and actually provide and apply for the job. So, and part of it actually we tried to create an inclusive work environment. You know, we were a division, we had a department that no Arabs were employed there. So, and we had to convince the people that this is part of life. This is going to do great to all of us. We're going to turn to be a much better organization by employing the people coming from the Arab society in different departments. So it started in the factories, it went to logistics, then in sales, then in marketing, then in HR, then economists, and today they are all over. But it was not done just overnight. It was a stepwise process, actually, getting from where we were towards where we are today. We have a diversity and inclusion steering committee, which is led by our VP HR. This committee actually meets regularly every month, and sometimes more than that. Every month I'm getting in my MENCOM member session, okay, I'm getting a dashboard about the level of diversity and inclusivity we have within our organization. How many Arab we recruited, how many left, and not only Arabs, also gender balance, many elements and KPIs that we are running towards this particular subject, which we perceive as to be one of the most important one within our organization. And another point which is worth to mention is actually the Forum Amitim, the Amitim Forum, which is actually, it's a kind of a business resource group built from managers coming from all the organization, Jewish and Arabs and Druze, actually sitting together and actually thinking about how to attract better Arab candidates, how to emphasize and to amplify actually the integration level between the Arab employees and the Jewish employees, to think about how to apply for their Arab employee needs. Okay, for instance, if we during the Corona, we actually celebrated the Ramadan season. And actually, there were specific elements that we consulted with Co-Impact and with this particular committee, this particular group, how to apply in the best way to the Arab society, to their families, that they will keep their safety. Okay, and not to meet with all the families and do all the social distances elements that are so essential in this Corona time. And of course, promoting different kind of initiatives and donations to the Arab society. So this group actually thinks about internally and externally how to make the integration more effective and better within our organization, but also how to take it out, how to liaise and actually engage with the Arab society in different fronts, from donations, education, and of course, business matters. Okay, and this group today is definitely advising us. This year actually will build a special market for the Arab society in our sales force. Okay, this is just an example, an initiative that came from this group. In a nutshell, I do believe that inclusiveness and diversity is something that, in order to be successful, it really has to turn to become part of the organization DNA. And this is not overnight. This is a multi-year plan that must be firstly and mostly adopted by the leadership of any organization. Personally, I do believe that this diversity element actually made us and turned out to be a best performing company in Israel. By all means, really by all means, because the way we think, the way we do things in a disruptive way that brings ideas from all over makes us much, much better in all respect in today's reality. And in general, I do believe this element is critical to create a liberal and modern society by all means. So that's needless to say. So in order to gather, I mentioned just to close my part, 4 principles. 1, take responsibility. It starts with you, the CEO, and then your ManCom members, your management, leadership team in your organization. Then move from being passive to be proactive, and think about the integration, how you integrate these people within your organization, because it's not going to happen by itself. You have to do proactive actions to make it happen, because automatically people are pushing back. Then try to connect it to the heart of the doing of your organization doing and your business, and get consulted with the specialists. Okay, in our case, we were lucky to have actually Co-Impact actually to work with us and help us in this particular important subject. So that's what it is. That's who we are. And thank you for having me.
Quick question before we go to Rima. Can you say a little bit about what your internal culture, thank you so much, internal culture is at OSEM today compared to what it was? If you can speak about a little bit of the feeling of the, what does an inclusive company look like on the inside, on the one hand, and then how does this, would you speak with other companies? How far, how is the interest and motivation of other companies to go through the same journey?
Yeah, so I'll try to explain what is diversity and inclusion in our company. In the past, when I go to past, I go 20 years back in time, okay, or even less than that, 10 years in time, okay? So what does it mean not being inclusive in Israel? Boys running the company, okay, boys, mainly boys, celebrating Jewish celebrations, making toasts for Rosh Hashanah, Passover, just Jewish celebration. Bar mitzvah, Arabs, yes, Arabs are great. But Arabs are to work in the machines, working in the factories, maybe logistics, driving cars, trucks. That is an uninclusive organization that used to be 15 years ago. And in some places it still exists as of today. In some places, no Arabs at all. Being inclusive is basically celebrating everything. When you go downstairs now, you will see a Christmas tree. Because we have Christians, we have Arab Christians. We do serve to, I don't know how many Christians. We have a couple of hundred of thousand Christians in our society that we sell them products. So we're celebrating in the stores Christmas, and then you have Hanukkah. And in Ramadan time, we had Ramadan festival, big festival with Ramadan. Actually, this year it was virtually festival because we couldn't have a big dinner, okay, here in our company. But normally we would have a big dinner inviting all the Arab employees, all the Arab customers to our organization, to our home, and celebrating it together with them, okay? We have some special promotions for their festivals. Communications to Christians, communications to Arabs, communications to Jews, communications to Jewish. We're not just celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Passover independent days anymore. No, we are celebrating everything. Everything. Arabs today coexist in all departments. They're everywhere, and they feel very safe. They feel very safe. They feel that they can say whatever they believe, and they are equal to any other person here. Retention plans are put in place in order to retain some of them, which are excellent and are getting attractive jobs in other places. So that's what it means being inclusive. It means respecting people, respecting different opinions, respecting different ideas, and that's what it means, in a true fashion.
Thank you very much. And now, please stay with us for Q&A, but now I want to turn it back to you to introduce Lima.
Thank you, Liron. Thank you so much, Avi. We are so proud to count you as our partner and for all what you have said, and we are proud to work with you. I would like now to introduce you to Rima Hashem-Plum. Rima is a Diversity and Inclusion Manager from HP Indigo. Rima also volunteers in the Young Co-Impact Forum. She will share her personal story and as an employee from Arab society. And also she will share insights about diversity and inclusion at HP and the effects of the corona. Please, Rima.
Thank you, Noah. Avi, it gave me a lot of hope. I wish that half of the CEOs in Israel are passionate about this issue as you. So I'm happy, I'm really thrilled and happy to hear your story. So thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me. So my name is Rima and I am the Diversity and Inclusion. Half of my position is Diversity and Inclusion Leader at HP Indigo, and the other half is promoting digital learning and leading the transformation to digital learning in the L&D team. And I'm going to share with you my personal story as an Arab, and I'm going to expose you to my career journey. I will start, by the way, Tzvi, I completed my master at the IDC, and I will start sharing with you from that point. When I chose really to start studying masters in organizational behavior, I was positive that there is no Arab HR in this field, nor any organizational consultant. So, and a lot of friends that already completed this degree, they convinced me not really to apply and to start studying because they told me they have no chance. It's not a field that's open for Arab. And I said, okay, there's the worst case scenario. I would relocate to Europe, to the US, to Canada, I don't know. So I started studying and I was the only Arab in my class. And I was then working in a student job and I had no career consulting before. So I started, there was an idea running in my head and said, I'm the only Arab between all these Jewish people. So they must know how they are going to start this career, or part of them, they were seniors. So I start asking colleagues, how did you start this career? And most of them, they said, we started in a placement company or recruiting company. And it's so easy to apply and to get a job there. It's an entry-level job. And then you will move, after 1 year, 2 years, you will move to the next stage. And there was another 3 students, Jewish students, that have the same qualification as mine. And we chose really to start applying. The only difference is that they got several job offers in 1 month, and I had to apply 7 months without any phone call, having any interview, even a phone call back. So after 7 months, I got accepted to one of the biggest placement company in Israel, but it was an offer. They wanted someone that speak Arabic and recruit Arab people. So, and the offer, I hate to be labeled because I know that I know better than just really, I'm not just an expert of an Arab because I'm an Arab. So I got this job and I said, this is my opportunity to go in this field. And I worked there for 1 year and a half, and then I got an offer from a CEO, Arab CEO, that offered me to join his startup. And in a genuine way, we found ourselves after 1 year that we have this diverse team. We had settlers, we had Arabs from Jerusalem, newcomers, and we opened R&D in Ramallah. We had an office in India, Ukraine, Poland, and our launches together, there was a different discussion. And to tell you that it was hard, it was not. It really was not. We were super committed to this. We are super convinced that we should recruit diverse people. And it happened in a very genuine way, without any effort. The really difficult mission is really to create inclusive environment and to create, generation Y doesn't really want just to get a job. He wants to feel that he belongs to the place he is working for. And I think it's also other generations. So after 4 years there, I was convinced that to be a diverse company, it's not a difficult mission. So it's possible, it's doable, and you should more invest into being more inclusive. I won't repeat how you be more inclusive. I think Avi summarized it very, very good, in a very good way. And after 4 years, I got accepted to a fellowship program with the American Embassy, and I traveled to the US to Duke University, and I there developed social initiative. The social initiative was formulated together with the Young Forum of Co-Impact, and it's a business club for Arab in their mid-career, because there's a lot of organization here in Israel that are investing in an entry position, promoting Arabs to entry positions, and there's a large number of Arabs that are still stuck in their mid-career, and they are having obstacle to get the next job. So I formulated there, I stayed there 3 months in Duke University and then in DC. And now the club, virtually, we have like 400 members and actively 100 that are active, and they are also part of the mentorship program. Most of the mentors are from they are Jewish, from different companies. A big part of them are executives. So that's the story of the YCC. And when I came back from the US, I said, now it's a piece of cake. I'm gonna find a job rapidly. So it won't be an issue, because now I have experience, 4 years experience in HR. And I went to Duke and I had this great initiative. So I'm gonna find a job. And I was shocked again that and by the way, you mentioned a lot about being fluent in Hebrew. My Hebrew is fluent, okay? It's the same as my Arabic language. So And I was applying over again without receiving any phone call back. And I was meeting all the requirements. And then I approached to the founder of the Co-Impact, Ifat, and told her that I have this obstacle really to get a job again. And she helped me. She had a really strong network, and she started to send my CV to different CEOs and VPHR. And she reached out to the VPHR of HP Indigo. The first time she told her, I don't have anything to offer her. It's a waste of time. She didn't really give up. She approached for the next time, for a second time. And again, the VPHR told her, I'm sorry, I really appreciate you and I appreciate your opinion. And I know that there's something that valued in this woman, but I don't have nothing to offer her. And the third time she gave up, she just said, okay, I will drink a coffee with her. And I went for a meeting with her. And before that, the VPHR called me and told me, please don't have any expectations because I have nothing to offer you. Okay, we will just have a coffee together and I will think how I can help you. And I drove like 2.5 hours from Haifa to Rehovot in the center. And I was like thinking in my head, okay, hopefully I'm not wasting time doing this. And the conversation quickly moved from a regular conversation to an interview, and from an interview to maybe I have something to offer you. We don't have open position, but we can open a position that can really fit your qualifications. And then came this idea that we really need someone to focus on all the D&I, promoting D&I in the organization. And also she saw a part of me that is tech savvy and very innovative. And she told me, okay, and the second part should be you should be more invested maybe in learning and development and bring a new vision to the team. And since then, I'm working now for almost 2 years at HP Indigo. I'm working on all the population, not just Arabs. And during the coronavirus, we also had really to terminate the employment of 150 employees. And we made sure that the 150 employees won't be from the minority population or from the diverse populations. So we try to decrease as much as we can, not to hurt the diverse populations. And from my insights during the COVID-19, I hear a lot from the Arab society. If we were in normal days, we are not the first priority for Israeli employers, then in this crisis, we are definitely not the first priority. But I think in this time, also, I can't ignore the political side of the basic law that said in very clear way that we are excluded because Israel is defined now as the Israeli state of the Jewish people. So you are automatically excluded. So as an Arab. So I think in this really difficult time for the Arab society, we need initiatives like Co-Impact, because Co-Impact, they don't just work with the employer side, they work with the candidate side, and they can decrease this really trust issues and trust crisis between the Arab candidates and the government and the employers. So I think I'm hoping for a better days, and I'm hoping this crisis will not let people to more relocate and for talents to move to different companies. I think we have a great talent pool here, and we need just to put in other glasses and to try to really look to this talent pool in a different way. So that's what's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you so much. We are proud to have you in our forum, Leadership Forum, Young Leadership Forum. And indeed, Rima is one of the HR Arab people in the biggest companies, and we are proud of her success.
Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for giving us such an in-depth picture of what efforts to create diversity inclusion in companies look like, and especially now during this crisis. We have a few more, maybe 5-6 minutes for Q&A. So I wanted to really tap the opportunity of having you guys here. I think there's two questions to start with. There's a lot of interest about the normalization agreements, and maybe for Avi Ben Asayag, does a change in the region create more opportunities and more interest in Arab citizens for employers? And then I want to ask both of you as well about mobility, all three of you as well, about mobility and what the challenges look like today, and how diversity and inclusion affects issues of moving up, for Arab citizens to move up into higher level and more skilled levels of employment, and how their presence there affects or improves the capacity to hire more Arab citizens into key positions. Who would like to start? Maybe Avi, would you like to start with the normalization question and opportunities?
Yeah. First, the normalization process that is running in the region is great by all means, and I'm trying in this respect actually to attract my colleagues in the Middle East and in the Emirates actually to start liaising and doing business. We talk more regularly now, and that's actually creates a great interest by all means. I do believe that it may actually also increase the level of diversity and inclusion as we speak about Arab employees in Israel. I do believe, but I don't count on that too much, I must say. I do believe that, employing more, I heard Rima's story and actually it touched me a lot, but it's about culture. It's about culture. It's about really believing that being diversified will turn you to be a much better organization. That's the story. And if you don't believe in it, then there is an issue there. Okay. And I saw in the Q&A here and in the chat that some of you guys are asking whether a parent company, European parent company, influenced that. Actually, a European parent company influences us in many respects, not only in that, in many respects. We are great entrepreneurs in Israel. There are many, great advantages in being Israelis, coming from all societies, by the way, Arab, Jewish, whatever, but actually gaining some experience from European parent companies is great. That is great by all means. So it's in general, and including for diversity and inclusion. When you go to Nestle headquarters, you see people from all over the world there. They're all there. You see Indians, Arabs, you see all of them, Chinese, all of them are there working together. And it is definitely part of it. But I must tell you proudly that we at Osem Nestle here in Israel are actually ranked at the highest level of diversity and inclusion at Nestle Europe in my zone. Okay, I'm part of the EMENA zone. Okay, so I'm proud of that because I certainly believe it makes us much better organization. We are a very successful organization here in Israel, very, very successful, and part of it is because of who we are. Now, people that are not diversified, another question, cannot actually climb and cannot be senior managers. People in our organization must have plural, liberal, and an open mind, must be open-minded, okay, and be able to work with many different people, and so persons or employees or managers that are not diversified enough or not inclusive, they really cannot actually be part of it. In their PDP, in their personal goals, personal development goals, being inclusive is a critical element to be successful in our organization.
So you answered the question about mobility of people who are not inclusive. Rima, would you like to speak a little bit about what it means to have Arab citizens at senior levels in a company as an HR person?
Can you emphasize more the question or clarify more the question?
Sure.
What do you mean?
As can you speak about the challenges that Arab citizens face in climbing up into a company, and once you have Arabs in higher levels, what that means for being able to expand the pipeline for other Arab countries?
If you look now at the Israeli companies at the C-level, okay, or the management, you see most of them are not Arab, they are Ashkenaz, most of them. So, and they have this strong network, and when a CEO or COO wants to greet someone, he must be, or she must be, also women are excluded, so he must be from his network. So usually executives are from particular group, and usually they recruit people that from the network, previous or current network. So, and that's what makes it more difficult to Arab employees really to jump up to the next stage. And sometimes they lack skills, but I can't blame really the Arab employee, because the organization should take this responsibility and really to develop a career path for all the employees. So I think there's a lot of challenges. First, there's the challenge of the Arab employee that he doesn't really believe that they will promote him. And there's a feeling that he should be grateful all the time for this position. So be grateful that you are here all the time. I'm talking more about less open organization and less really in a advanced stage of diversity and openness. There's always this really feeling of the Arab employees that be thankful you are here, be thankful, look at your village, look at your environment. You have this degree now, you have this stable job, just stay there, and that's it. And I think the new generation is different. The new Arab generation is very different. He is more open to different things. The internet exposed them to a lot of things. So a lot of young Arabs now say, okay, if I don't have a chance here, I will move abroad. I will have a better chance. Or I can sit home and work remotely in any position that I want. So the whole ecosystem changed. So there's a lot of elements that really changed the experience of an Arab in the organization.
I just want to add over the words of Rima, there is a challenge. We know it from the beginning with this 0.3% of managers in the private sector. There is a challenge, and even the Arab companies, the leading Arab companies, talk about the same challenge.
He freezed.
Okay,
Yeah.
it looks like Nawa is frozen.
Yeah,
I think that during the hard work that Avi has described of creating a culture, accompanying managers, putting goals, also mentoring program, and the success stories that we bring to the Arab society every week through the media is all of them are some of the tools that we put an effort in the private sector and in the Arab society to change what has not been happening for years in the employment field, and really to create the change. We're happy to say that there are many promotion, very senior positions. It's not enough. And I think that we will see the impact over the years. The more of numbers of Arab employees in the biggest company, we will see more numbers of people moving up the ladder. So I hope that in 5 years we will talk about only promotion and not having more Arab in the private sector.
Thank you all. We are so short on time. So thank you so much for this rich discussion. Again, the chat was really responsive. I think people were really pleased to hear these stories and to get this insight. I want to do now, to close the meeting, several things simultaneously. First of all, normally we have time for in-person processing. We gave up on it to keep the Zoom to an hour and 3/4 and not longer. So please, Michelle, if you can put the link up. We've set up a whiteboard so that at least we can see what people are thinking and feeling in the room, share some takeaways on the whiteboard, as well as thoughts about how these issues may be relevant to your communities that this discussion sparked. As you do that, I also want to invite the staff to introduce themselves. As I said yesterday, the task force is a team effort, and we are staffed in such a way that is intended to really be a support for the American Jewish community of the variety of organizations to ask, to learn themselves about these issues and to bring them to their communities, whether it's to community programs, to their missions, or to board conversations. So in the very last minute, in order of the length of time at the task force, Michelle, who has been at the controls and making everything run so smoothly, can you please introduce yourself? And after that, Erica, our program manager, and after that, Ilan Fathi Amit, our new Israel representative, who I hope you'll all have opportunities to interface with directly and have been excellent on the chat, giving answers. Please, Michelle, and is the link on the chat? Can you also share your screen? Now you'll see how Michelle multitasks.
Let me share the screen first. I was going to say that I should go last because you are probably tired of hearing from me. But my name is Michelle Herrera, and I am the Task Force Operations Manager. And hopefully you are all able to see my screen.
Yes. Erica.
Hi there, I'm Erica. I'm Education and Resources Program Manager. It's great to see some old and new faces. And if you're at all interested in bringing some of these issues into your own communities, I am a contact person for that and look forward to being in touch with many of you.
Ilan.
Hi everyone, I'm Ilan Fathi Amit, the new Israel representative at the task force. Happy to meet you all and reply in the chat here or down there. I've been working with the Arab Civil Society for the past 15 years, and it's a pleasure to join the team and answer questions and do some service in here as well.
Thank you, everyone. We will follow up with an email recording of this meeting, a transcript of the chat, and again, our annual report. We look forward to seeing you on many more events, on many more subjects in this coming year. Thank you for responding on the whiteboard. Brian, would you like to close the meeting officially?
Yeah, it's a thank you to the staff. You put on a very good show in a very difficult time. In 8 days, a number of us on this call will be celebrating Hanukkah. And we will light the menorah, and we will hope that there will be a better world in front of us and into the scourge that has changed all of our lives, and a promise that we will continue to work for the betterment of Israel and for all of mankind. And thank you for joining us, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes the 2020 annual meeting of the task force. We will see you again soon.
Mazel tov.